Hello, I am Anthony Mueller, the wine advocate reviewer for Washington State and South Africa. Today I have an amazing guest today. One of the royalty of the Swartland. Really interesting guy. Focused with soil, amazing mineral tension. He's probably a better surfer than you. This guy is amazing. He's absolutely fantastic. He will be joining me momentarily. We'll see where he is. So, see if we can get him to join. There he is. Eben
How's
Sadie,
it?
Sadie Family Wines. How are you, sir? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Anthony. Can you hear me?
Fantastic. Let's turn this up a touch. Fantastic. So, welcome. First of all, thank you for joining me today. It's 1 p.m. Wednesday, the 20th. I know it's 10 p.m. there in the Swartland where you are in South Africa. So, thank you for staying up for us tonight. First off, how is it right now being in South Africa with the quarantine happening? I know that we had the 2020 vintage for South Africa. It had just finished. All the grapes have pretty much come in. And then you're basically hit with a global pandemic. Everything shuts down. Some of the people out there most of the world is able to go out and actually still buy alcohol, buy cigarettes, buy whatever they need to enjoy. But South Africa, for a time, stopped alcoholic production and still hasn't allowed for the sale of alcohol yet. It's going on almost 60 days with no alcohol. How are you doing?
No, we're doing all right. I mean, I think there's a lot of people in distress that don't have wine at this stage. I think it just shows why it's so critical to be stocked up on wine at all time. But because you never know what happens in the next rainy day. But
Sure.
yes, I mean, when the pandemic struck, our country followed a very quick lockdown. I think we were the first country to lock down even before there was a single death.
Yeah.
And that was all good and well, but that was followed by very draconic, at this stage it's quite draconic, and our government took a very standoff approach. And fine wine, that's the problem, is wine, it's all classified under alcohol, no cigarettes, so nothing can move. So all of the business side of what the project and the winery and the domain is about, all of that is just hammered in. But post harvest is probably the busiest time for us of the year in the vineyards.
Yeah.
So we tried not to focus too much on that, and we went straight into what I think is the most important time of the year. And
For sure.
I see it in very many instances where people come out of a harvest and they go into kind of relaxation mode. But actually, the most critical time to work in vineyards is post-harvest. It's the only time that you can put the new compost into the soil, you can prepare your seed beds, you can plant your cover crops. There's so much that you must do before the first winter rainfall sets in. And that's basically what we've been busy with, it's as much grapes as you've taken out of a vineyard, that's almost as much effort that you must put in back immediately thereafter. So that's what we've been keeping ourselves busy with. And we strapped in an incredible and very serious drought at the moment.
Yeah.
And I mean, this might sound like crazy, but for me, the drought here is almost more real than this pandemic. It's been coming for 4 years.
Yeah.
And it's required so many changes in every little aspect of what we do. I think the drought has made us better farmers. We have taken very many of our resources as a given, and we definitely have reviewed every single thing that we're busy with. But the pandemic aside, I mean, I always say farming is a contact sport. You gotta go in hard.
Yeah.
You can't go sit on your back. And it's seasonal, and this is the season for preparing the soils for the winter to come. You need to get everything in there, and that's what we've been busy with. And yeah, I think the pandemic we've just finished planting the last cover crops this week. We're busy doing mulching in the vineyards and all of that at the moment. But I think once that's done, and it's gone a little bit quiet now, 2 months after harvest, I think it will maybe only strike me properly then.
Gotcha. Yeah. So talking about cover crops and planting, and the drought. Let's talk about drought plantings. What do you have planned to combat the drought with as far as plantings are involved?
So, first of all, I think, and this is a big topic in the world at the moment. I mean, when you enter into the world of regenerative farming, I think the big discussion is always tilling the soil, not tilling the soil. What is the best way? Cover crops, no cover crops, only compost. I think no singular regime is going to bring the future. I think it's combinations of things, and often I find things, especially in the world of wine, people tend to get quite dogmatic. And dogma, the problem with dogma is it kills your brain, because you stop reasoning and you stop being open to new things, and you basically put all of your own ideologies above everybody else's. And so at the moment, what we are trying to do is we're trying to build the carbon levels in our soil. The only way you can build carbon in the soil is you must add carbon. A good form of that is compost. We farm here in a very strong wheat growing area. We also plant some cereals and stuff, not much, but a lot of my neighbors are big cereal farmers. So we truck in a lot of the hay bales and all of that, and we use the mulching. Yeah. That's also future carbon into the soil. But when you add a lot of food to the soil, you must also realize that you put all the microorganisms under pressure, because they now want to devour all of this food. And you can take your soil into a nitrogen negative phase. So you must add organic compost and all of that, so that nitrogen is available. So with cover crops, the biggest idea here currently is we try and grow pretty heavy, thick cover crops. And then in spring, if it's a very, very dry spring, we will mow it down and let the cover crops go lie down. But it will mean that they stop using water in that spring when the vine's starting to compete for the same water. But at the same token, if it's a wetter spring, you can allow for that cover crop to ripen more, and then we will roll it flat, and we will try and create a thick carpet of plant material on top of the soil. And that plant material will bring down the solar radiation on the ground, will keep the wind off the ground and the evapotranspiration that will come from that. And it also homogenizes the soil temperature. So you basically kind of clothe your soil with organic matter and try through that to remove your soil from all the elements that's trying to take the moisture, retain all of the moisture, and have it accessible for your plants. The Swartland is 90% unirrigated. Yes. And I have my own ideas about where irrigation sits in viticulture, but I mean that's a personal issue. But I prefer not to irrigate vineyards. I think it's we must learn how to grow vineyards without pumping water out of the earth.
Yeah, it's a very very smart thing. One aspect that I always get talking from you is that you really, really do care about the plants, you care about the soil, so much so that your property, the vineyards where you make wine from are really nowhere near each other. There are some that are close, but you could literally be in a car driving for hours from vineyard to vineyard. What drives you to choose a specific vineyard to make wine from?
It's a very, very, very good question. I think there's a assumption out there in the world that a great vineyard always has to be kind of a vineyard that hangs on a slope, on the cliff's edge, where it's almost dangerous to walk, and it's got to overhang an ocean or a river. Terroir has very little sympathy for our ideals, and when you stand in a vineyard and it's got a beautiful view, that doesn't mean it's got a great terroir either. Great terroir is a combination of so very many elements, and it's much more than the view or the obvious that you can see. So for me, when we start working on a potential terroir, I think obviously there's a big difference between a vineyard that's already planted and whether you look at an absolutely vacant site. But let's just take, there's nothing. You have no idea what's going on. So what we do is, and I'm involved with, you know, you can't make a great wine on your own. So I work with very many professionals, and I can tell you the most important thing is to surround yourself with professionals and the best information that's out there, and use all of these people and what they're willing to put into your project. And so we will, when we take a vineyard, we will start to build a terroir model. And how that works is obviously the topography, the climate, the sunlight hours, and the relevant solar radiation on that site. We actually build solar radiation models for the site. The actual drainage of the site or the absence of drainage, airflow patterns, rainfall, frequency of rainfall, how does the rain fall, how does the rain actually penetrate that soil, and that soil type, the organic status of the soil at the point of when we get involved with the soil, the carbon percentages in the soil. We do soil mapping, we dig soil holes in the entire terrain, and we start mapping the soil and classifying the soils. But you can never find those exact breaks. So we, in recent years, have started to do electromagnetic scanning of the soil. Okay. It's a bit on resistance tomography, but it's basically like you would do a sonar on a lady to know what's going on in the belly. We sonar the soils to find those fine break points. So we do the electromagnetic scanning. We start to build a terroir map. And I think if there's vines already planted on that soil, you can obviously look at the vine's actual growing pattern, the shoot lengths, the internodium lengths, the shoot thickness, the growth pattern, the way the plant makes up reserves at the end of the season, and obviously actually the grapes. But when we build that thing, we actually have an 18-layered model of what the terroir can potentially be. And I think great terroir, what I understand from it, is not in the extremes. It's in the balance of things. And these things must be balanced. And that's why, for example, in Burgundy, the Grand Crus are to be found in the mid-slope. Not at the top, not at the bottom. It's a mid-slope equation. It's a very easy thing to say, but there is very profound reasons why the Grand Crus are positioned where they are in the very many villages of Burgundy. And when you go to Piedmont or you go to any of these old grape-growing regions, obviously they've had the advent of time. We haven't had all of that in the New World, but we also have technology that can help us. But you can also just not stare yourself blind at the technology either. I mean, there is at the end of this also inclination. If all the numbers are right and the owner is a dreadful person that you lease the site from, I mean, what wine do you expect to make from it? So there's very many things that must come into play. But terroir, I mean, I've got vineyards that hang on slopes, and then I've got a vineyard that's next to the railway line at the bottom of the river, and that makes better wine. So terroir is it's a mystery, but we know a lot more about it today than I think 20, 30 years ago.
For sure. I mean, it's one thing that, you know, when people look at terroir, there's all these misnomers and ideas about what should grow where. And I find currently right now one of the most exciting times to be alive in the wine industry, because there's so many great things happening, and science is ultimately pushing the next corner to uncover what mystery we'll find next. So let's talk about regenerative practices. What specifically do you like to do with the vineyards, which you make the grapes from?
We, part of regenerative farming is, to start viewing the vineyard as a big unit. And I always looked at the vineyard and all I could see is the row of vines. But the row of vines is not of importance, because it's kind of in the vineyard. When you've chosen a variety or a number of varieties, you actually already decided your crop. And you can't do anything about it. When you plant a vineyard, hopefully you did it well and it will last 100 years if you did your job right. But everything else is the variable. So regenerative farming is about the distance between the vines, the what we call the work rows. The roads where you actually have, and that's also where you're going to have the majority of your tractor traffic. Because when you plow, when you spray, when all of that, you're putting heavy machines on it, heavy equipment on it. What's your policies on compaction? What is your policies on how you're going to spray? And in that area, that's the area that you actually want to farm best, because that's where you want your vineyards to grow their vine shoots.
For sure.
Now, if you have drip irrigation only under the vine row, if I'm a root, I'm not going to move from there. I'm going to stay right there,
of course,
where it's kind of easy.
Where the water is, yeah.
Yeah, I call that the trust fund zone. Okay. It's just very relaxed to grow in that zone. So you must make the full surface area of a vineyard attractive, and to make it attractive, you got to work with the compost, as I've mentioned, the cover crops. We use a lot of bacteria like mycorrhizas and trichodermas, and I still work with a 500 preparation, biodynamic preparation. We're not biodynamic. We are biologic. We view it as a biological unit. I don't just want to hang on to biodynamics or just do this or that. As I say, I don't have a dogmatic approach. So, and we've learned a hell of a lot from regenerative farming in the last number of years, from actually people that's outside the wine industry, people that, there's amazing farmers living in Dakota, in Northern Carolina, guys that actually took the trouble to come out here on some of our agricultural forums to come and talk to us, to come and share with us, leaving their farms behind to come and teach us the future. They might not grow grapes, but they know how to make soil come to life. And but you can do all of this. In the end, your spray program needs to be organic. You need to build the system, but you also can't take a vineyard. It's always what I say. It's maybe not a good idea to go completely off medication while you've got a heart condition. You're out of shape. You have no immune system. You're on heavy drinking. You're smoking.
Looks like he froze up for a second. Let's see if we can get him back.
Sorry, we just lost.
Yeah, we got it.
No, we just lost the connection there for a second. Awesome. But you got to build the system. You can't go again from one extreme to the next. And so regenerative farming is really about building the soil, building the ecosystem. Sustainable farming is about all the resources that you use to make that regenerative system. How do you farm those resources that it doesn't come at immense cost? For example, if all of the compost that I use in the vineyard have a very negative effect where that comes from again, but my system is positive. That is not sustainable. Mm-hmm. My vineyard's still regenerative, but my system is not sustainable. So you got to marry all of those policies.
For sure. It's important to have every option open when you need it, because there's going to come a time when you have to look at all options and make the best choice. So last week you sent me a picture from a vineyard that you were working with. Can you talk about that?
So in 2010, I started wandering off the Swartland. What makes the Swartland seriously crazy is it is it's basically the biggest appellation in South Africa, and it's not the most planted appellation in South Africa, but it's the biggest appellation in circumference. And what we have done is I think that is also the big plus point. We've got vineyards stretching from the ocean into 3 very big mountain ranges, the Paardeberg, the Piketberg, and the Kasteelberg in Riebeek. And so we discovered in 2010 a vineyard on the west coast. It's way up north. It's about an hour, 40 minutes from where I'm located now. Mm-hmm. And this vineyard is planted to Palomino and Shannon. It's 85 years old now, and we started producing a wine from it, and the wine's called Scorpioen, which means scorpion. It's got a massive racy, stingy acidity. But the name actually Scorpion is a name that came from the people that lived there for that vineyard. And I started working with this wine, and the wine is planted on pure limestone soils, mm-hmm. with like quite sandy, almost beach sand on top of it. Yeah. So when you just look at the vineyard, it looks like the beach. Yes. And then when you dig about 10 inches down, mm-hmm. you've got pure limestone like you'll have in Champagne, Chablis, and parts of Jerez. And so the wine that comes from the site is very mineral, it's very saline, it's very linear, it's very strict. And it's a very upright wine. So I just said, we with the challenges of global warming, acidity, pHs, and all of that, let's plant there. So we have just planted there over the past year. We've spent an enormous amount of time on actually studying that terroir. Mm-hmm. There's nothing else there really, so we don't have much information. But we've just gone there and we have planted Acertico, Grillo, Catarato, Fiano, Fermentino, Bastardo, Chenin Blanc, Grenache Blanc, Cinsault Blanc. Because what we want to do is in time, we'll probably introduce those grapes into one of our signature wines, which is Palladius, purely because of that minerality, saline, and very high acidity norm that we find there. Yeah. I mean, our challenge is not to get texture or depth in our wines. Our challenge is to produce wines and have wines that are within their own refined enough. And a lot of that refinement is, in my view, locked up in that terroir. And so I've planted a big spread of grapes there. I would say it's very easy to pull it out, mm-hmm. but time is very valuable, and I'd rather pull a vineyard out than wait or miss something because I didn't plant it or whatever. And it basically falls within the strategy of what we've got at the domain where, we're currently farming with 32 grape varieties, and it's not as a result of schizophrenia. It is basically to address the reality of what the new world is. And yes. If you look at Europe is planted to 5,000 grape varieties. Mm-hmm. And Europe is not a very big place. So Europe needs 5,000 grape varieties to make all of those beautiful countries and all of their soils come to life. But yet in a new world, we've gone and New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, South America, North America, we've essentially planted to 6 grapes, to generalize, but it's mostly been Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Cabernet, Merlot, Shiraz, and Pinot Noir. And you need all of the grapes of the world to be planted. And we're only going to develop the new world if we open it to the needed varieties to have all of the expression. And you cannot plant 5 continents to 6 grapes. It's suicidal.
Yes.
The new world is seen as being very progressive, but we've been actually very slow. And we've been the fossils.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one thing I've always admired about you is you're on the search for the pieces of terroir that will grow the best grapes so you can make wine from. So it shows a sense of terroir. Taking that and then being able to blend different parcels together to make something that's nothing short of magic. When tasting your wines, I often think of people starting a fire from just 2 pieces of stick in the forest, rubbing them together, and then creating fire from it. Because you're literally looking at all these different plots and trying to make the best expression, best wine. And with that, your wines have this amazing mineral tension that they're just loaded with texture that are just fantastic. You recently had a 20-year vertical of Columella that when I saw a picture, I was immediately envious and jealous that I didn't get to try. But can you tell us your experience with all of the 20 vintages going back? Was it to 01? Was it the
2000?
2000. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what is one thing is for sure, a great wine is a work of time, and you should go slow. I often, visiting very many guys, and I have a lot of young guys knocking on the door here, and I always say to them, just go a little bit slower. It's not a race. It's an absolute journey, and you need an objective, but you need to take it slow. So how we work with Columella and Palladius are 2 signature wines, and it's very much the same for these historic wine bottlings that we do of the old vineyards. If you change too very many things in the winery, in the end, when you look at the resultant wine, it's very difficult to understand where those qualities came from. And so we have a policy here at the Domain. We only make changes to a vinification protocol once a decade. So once we've said this is how we're going to make Columella, we do it for 10 years like that, because we need to pressure test those policies. So we need to live through a cold year, a warm year, a dry year. We've lived through very many of those now lately. It needs to go through a wet year, heat waves, no heat waves, economical things like what we're going to experience now with this COVID thing. That thing needs to live through all of it, climatically, human, whatever. Because if you keep one thing constant, you can actually start measuring if those protocols are absolute and if they will stand the test of time. If you do too many changes, there's no way you will be able to know where the measure is from. Yeah. It's like, when you work in any laboratory or on any trial of any nature that's of any importance, one will know that the most important sample is your control. The one that you have as a departure point, and you measure everything from there. If you take that away, you've got no measure. It's like taking magnetic north of the compass. It's senseless. It means nothing. So the first years of Columella was, we started, and the first 10 years we made it the same. In those years, we picked riper. We picked at the upper ends of 14.
Mm-hmm.
We maybe extracted a little bit too much. We destemmed everything, and we used a little bit more oak. Not a little bit more, significantly more oak. Now, at year 10, we came to the first 10-year review, and we said, listen, there's enough extraction in the swat, and there's enough concentration, there's enough of everything. So let's make a couple of changes. So at the 2009 vintage was the last vintage. So 2010 was the first wine. We started doing 60% whole clusters, destemming only 60%, slowing down the extraction points, stop pigaging, only do 1 bucket over a day. We tried to pick everything below 14% alcohol, not because we're trying to reach physiological ripeness. Adi Barnos, my neighbor, always makes the reference. He says we must work on psychological ripeness. So psychologically, we decided over 14, I don't drink over 14% alcohol wine. And the riper you pick fruit, the more mature it is, the more likely it is that it's going to mature even faster in the bottle. And we want to produce wines that's very long lived. So we put that measure in place. And then on the oak regime or the aging regime, we went down from 60% new oak to 10%, which is a drastic measure. And we're only 12 months in new oak, and then, or 10% new oak, and then we move it over in food rest. And now we've made the wine another decade like that. So when you saw that picture, that was us looking at the first decade and the second decade. Both have now fully been lived in. They stand as proof. And all I can say at this stage is we might actually go back to destemming a little bit more again, because the textural qualities and the phenolic qualities of the first decade maybe had over time a slight edge and a better standing. But definitely on the fresher fruit and a little bit more of lesser oak and all of that, and slowing down the whole respiration process in the aging, it's all been good measures. So we have the analysis of the wines over 20 years at the time of bottling, and now 20 years later, how the tannins work, the stability of the phenolics, the anthocyanin proliferation through the wines, everything. And all I can say is that I think we're on a good trajectory, and we in 2 years' time, we'll do the same for Palladius, our white wine. So slowly, we will catch the monkey. It's not going to happen in a day, but there's time. I mean, there's a lot of time. I can't believe 20 years is gone. I almost feel tricked.
It happens quick, for sure. So, both of the Columella and Palladius are blends. It was important to you in the beginning to have not just one varietal, but a blend to say this is Swartland and this is what it's about. Of all the different varietals that you work with, is there a specific varietal that you care to work with the most, and why do you prefer to work with such varietal?
Because I think not only myself. I mean, I work in a much greater team, but the consensus here, and if I can speak outside the team of the winery, my own very personal view is, when I walk in a vineyard, I actually can't even see the varieties anymore. For me, all I can see is either a great combination of a vine to a site, and I can either see a vine that's in ultra performance. So it's like looking at athletes. Sometimes you just see an athlete, and after the first lap, this is not going to wash. It doesn't have the posture of an athlete. It doesn't have the discipline of an athlete. It doesn't have anything of this race. And so I actually, and it's not to shy away from it, I honestly don't have any preference of any variety. For me, it's very critical that the right variety is planted in the right site. when you start planting varieties because somebody in a boardroom sat down and he says, you know, Chardonnay is trending right now, or unoaked Chardonnay is trending, or Pinot Grigio is trending, so let's plant Pinot Grigio. That is removed from terroir because the soil was never brought into the equation, the conditions, the topography, the setting, nothing. That is Excel spreadsheet works, and that's not going to produce great wine. I don't care what the grape is and how unpronounceable it is. If that grape is going to be the best communicator for that very site, that's the grape that we're going to plant. And it is hit and miss. In very many sites that we plant now, the very difficult sites, we kind of also, in a way, and I'm just very honest about it, you got to hedge bets. Yeah. So in a perfect world, if South Africa has had 1,000 years of grape growing history, I mean, we've got a fantastic grape growing history. To put the record straight, we're the oldest in the New World. Mm-hmm. And we planted grapes in this country when Bordeaux was still a swamp. So this is a place with history, but it doesn't have 2,000 years of history. So to hedge beds, I would normally plant maybe 2 or 3 varieties instead of just one. But you know, in 10 years' time, we're going to have an absolute, and we can just resolve to that one. Plant what belongs in a site, and I think you're in with one hell of a shot to make a proper wine. Mm-hmm. If you don't, you might make a wine that ticks a box on some kind of list or some kind of shelf, but it doesn't mean it's going to be desired or that you yourself will be fulfilled by that wine.
True. I completely agree. I've thought about this at length, many a night trying to fall asleep. Why do people make certain wines? And certainly there's a market for, certain varietals from certain places, even cost-effective wines that everyone can purchase. But at that point, those wines become a grocery. They're no longer art or passion. This is a box. We'll plant it here. We'll make X units of it, put it in bottle, and we'll sell X number of pallets. And there's always been this level of passion and purity that comes through with your wines that are just fantastic. I've been watching some of the comments come through, and some people want to know what's in your glass.
It's actually I'm confused myself because I put 2 bottles in the fridge and neither was labeled. So I've been sitting here for 37 minutes trying to figure out what it was. But I'm convinced because I took a bottle of Acertico and I took a bottle of Grillo out of we've got a experimental cellar and we bottle I think 36 bottles every year of all these heavy experimental wines, and so this is a glass of Grillo actually, and it's drinking really well. The vineyard's 4 years old. It's not filtered. It's quite dirty and everything, but it's giving me pleasure. And as I'm talking here, I see it move. I've had it open now for a week.
That's awesome.
Because I actually took all the whites from 2017 from the experimental winery home, and I opened all of them, and I've left them now for a week because I want to see which ones are more bulletproof than others, and then I'll taste them in 2 weeks again, and I'll see which ones are really bulletproof, and in 3 weeks we will know who are the guys that's going to carry us into the future. It's sometimes a good thing not to finish a bottle of wine the first night and just let it kind of idle there in the fridge. In our house, I have always very many bottles open, all at different stages of drinking.
Likewise.
It's a combination of trying to understand the wines, because some of the wines, there's wines on the planet. I'm a complete wine nerd. So there's wines on the planet that I've been drinking for 20 years and I still haven't figured them out. So sometimes I hope I keep hanging on to them. I'll get to understand what is making them so amazing. So it's maybe a little bit of an issue of not being able to say goodbye. but there is really a lot to be said to leave a bottle of wine for a couple of days in your fridge, or even 2 weeks.
I concur. Yeah, I concur.
So yeah, this is a 1 week old Grillo.
That's awesome. Yeah, I had a question from fellow reviewer Monica Larner on Instagram last week about are there any producers making Italian varietals in South Africa, and answered her, but had no idea that you had an experimental vineyard with all these different Italian varietals, and they sound amazing. And it's unfortunate that there's only 36 bottles of them, but at least you're getting
I mean, we have planted a lot, so also to fast track the work that we are busy with. We plant the varieties also in a number of different terroirs, significantly different, because you can plant Grillo in the limestone soils in the West Coast, and then I also planted the same selections I planted here in the granite soils, and there's a little bit of it planted in the slate soils, and so that we can compare. But we've planted Aglianico, Negramaro. These grapes, time will bring the truth. Some of the most exciting grapes that we've planted has been like Agriogitico and Zinamavro of Greece. I mean, they're unpronounceable. I mean, how do you sell that? It's the only way you're going to sell it is you got to call it dry red. That's your best stab at it. But it doesn't matter if I'm seeing now already Agriogitico in 2 sites that we've planted, 2 completely different soils, excelling in both of those soils. I mean, it's a no-brainer that this grape belongs here. Yeah,
for sure. I think for your labeling concern for how do people pronounce it, I think you pull a play out of the playbook from Robert Mondavi, back 50, 60 years ago, when no one could pronounce Sauvignon Blanc correctly. He just called it Fumé Blanc, pulling from Puy Fumé, and everyone could say Fumé Blanc, so maybe just call it Aggie. Because people could say Aggie. You got to come up with a fun.
Yeah, I've been to that vineyard. That vineyard that Mr. Mondavi planted at the time is still there. When I visited a good friend of mine, Tegan Pasalakwa, he actually took me. It's the L block. And I mean, on the notion of terroir, I mean, that whole area at the back of Tokelon there in Oakville, I mean, that is flat riverbed or volcanic sites, but I mean, it's still great viticultural area. And you've got Mount Harlan and Mount Vida and the back of the Mayacamas Mountains and all these amazing sites, all the hillside stuff. But I mean, that is still a remarkable site. And again, if it's great terroir, I think even if you get the variety wrong with about 50%, you're still in with a good chance. You must just first identify the great terroir. The variety is only one little player in a very big orchestra of things. Sure. And I think it's sometimes overplayed in the world of wine.
Fair enough. There's a fair amount of great wines that are blends, but some will, of course, argue that the purity of a single varietal from a single vineyard is also intriguing as well.
It is.
That's for another debate.
No. Our climate doesn't allow for it. Do you know how single varietals work? So when you look at the areas that's very single varietal driven, they by large, and we have to generalize here, because if you don't generalize in the world of wine, you're not going to get anywhere. All the great single varietal areas of the world are continental climates. So the center of Spain with Tempranillo, Piemonte with Nebbiolo, or maybe with Barbera, Burgundy with their Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs, Alsace with Pinot Blanc or Gewürztraminer, Germany with their Rieslings, the Wachau with their Gruners. And the reason for that is those grapes, all grapes grow in the Mediterranean. But as grapes move out of the Mediterranean, which is where they actually all grow and they can all flower and they can all prosper. When you go into more difficult continental climates, very many challenges come to the foreground. You know, flowering becomes a problem, wet springs, cold climate, bitter winters, frost, high disease pressures, everything. And all of those circumstances actually then will select a very few number of grapes that will excel in that climate. And that's when you arrive at a single varietal, and great wine is to be then made from that single varietal. But I think it's senseless to have a dialogue whether single varietals are better than blends, or it's the same as the senseless discussion is young vines and old vines. I mean, if you don't have young vines, you don't have old vines. If you don't plant your young vines properly, you won't have old vines. So
true.
I think, and the beauty of it is that the world of wine is not one thing. It's a very diverse, very complex thing. And I think the wine trade and the commercial side of wine and the ignorance of the consumer, which is only to be blamed from us as producers in the wine fraternity, we're trying to simplify the world of wine. We should stop doing that. We're not selling a soda here, or we're not selling a beer. We're selling we're selling the highest point of the world of agriculture here. You know, this is the crown of the world of agriculture, is a bottle of wine. I don't want to downplay the value of a well-made cheese or a great olive oil, but a bottle of wine that you can produce, and 60 years later you drink it and it fills a whole room and brings a whole room to be speechless. I mean, there's very little produce in the world that have the capacity to do that. And wine is a complex thing, and we should stop trying to make it simple. We must just teach people better. That's the challenge.
Yeah, for sure. I had this discussion with the master sommelier the other week about, if you take a bottle of wine that's been aged perfectly, items that could happen, packaged goods, you know, you would never want a steak in a bottle that was 60 years old. That just doesn't seem, just seems disgusting. That's one of the great things about wine, is it's so complex. It's science, it's nature, and it's art all in one swoop. And it can be enjoyed with all five senses.
Absolutely.
It's a very, very, very interesting thing. Let's talk about elegant wine versus thin, weak wine that's just, you know, lacking in character. What things would you look at particularly as far as trying to make an elegant wine versus ending up making a thin, weak wine?
Yeah, I think one could say in the world of wine, at least in the mid-90s to say late 2000s, the pendulum was very much on concentrated, quite extracted wines, very dark wines.
Yes.
The word opaque was very important. So I think the pendulum's now busy swinging to the other side, but
sure.
Again, the great wine is not to be found in any of the extremes. There's a lot of wines today being produced where a lot of the grapes are being picked at very much lower alcohol, but not that the viticulture was not adapted. So there was no viticultural adaptation to this new picking regime, and a number of things happened. It didn't happen. So by merely picking a vineyard 2 weeks or 3 weeks earlier and reducing your alcohol from 14.5 to 12 doesn't mean all of a sudden you're making elegant wine. It will actually bring about that you'll have less alcohol in your wine, and most definitely you'll have more acidity. I mean, that's the physiology of the plant and the grape. But you end up with like a donut wine. You know, the center core of the wine is empty, and there's nothing to be found. The wine is insipid, and actually, it's just a thin wine, and we should use the term thin wine. To produce a wine at a lower alcohol level, you need to plant a variety that ripens at a lower alcohol level. You should plant a soil that has a slower ripening process to it. You must adapt your pruning, your canopy, your yield. All of your viticultural practices should be adapted so that you could end up picking, say, 1% or 2% lower, without sacrificing this mid structure. And when I go around these days, I go to very many people, and people are like, geez, this wine is so elegant, it's so refined, and everybody's trying to compare their wines to Burgundy and all of that. And I'm like, no, it's just unripe. And the problem is when you pick a grape unripe, you actually, it's like you're cutting the umbilical cord too early, and the baby needs to go into an artificial environment where it can keep on having life. And when you do that with a wine, if you cut those grapes too early, you actually cut those grapes before the grapes have encapsulated the very essence of that terroir. So when you taste these very low alcohol new wines that's made, and we make low alcohol new wines, but often it's just the product of picking early. They're all just a very monolithic red spectrum and no real horizon to them or depth. And I think there's a lot of confusion out there at the moment where a lot of very insipid, just early picked wines are perceived as being great wines. It's going to be tragic because very many of these wines are not going to age. No. And some of them actually sell for a lot of money. So you're going to sit with a lot of thin brown wine that you're not even going to cook with in 15 years' time. Yeah. So be careful out there. You got to adapt a whole lot of things to bring that ripening forward. And it's not a matter of just rocking up at the vineyards 2 weeks early and picking it earlier and at low alcohol and think that you've now done a major thing. There's a lot of farming, a lot of site selection, and a lot of varietal aspects to it, and also in the cellar. So, yeah, just being red doesn't mean you're fine.
Yeah, I completely
being
agree.
Black, as being opaque doesn't mean you're not addressing terroir. I mean, a 200% over oat or 200% oat wine, pitch black, whatever, might miss the mark of the terroir, but at the same token, insipid 12% diluted wine is also going to maybe not be the best expression of terroir. It's in the balances.
Correct. Yeah, that's one thing a lot of people don't take into consideration when thinking about when consumers think about these wines. That there are many curves of a grape's life cycle. People just think, oh, it's ripeness. It's like, well, there's physical ripeness and there's phenolic ripeness, and they're all kind of headed the same way. And there's so many different aspects to look at. Just picking 2 weeks earlier just because is not necessarily the right answer. You have to look at the grape, the phenolics, all the chemistry behind it, and this is where I think having a skilled technician be able to run just some simple numbers on those grapes to look at it to make sure that there is some mature phenolic ripeness involved when trying to keep that pendulum kind of swing back the other way. We've got about 5 minutes left. If you were so we know that you've worked in Purot in Spain. You've traveled the world quite extensively. You're very familiar with Burgundy wines. If you could choose to make wine from just one vineyard anywhere in the world, what would that place be?
Mm, It's a difficult question because, I mean, yeah, if you asked me that question 20 years ago, I would have probably said from a very prolific vineyard in Barolo. And if you asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have probably mentioned a very prolific vineyard in Burgundy. But where I am now, I've come to kind of a new understanding where, and it was also one of the maybe the biggest reason for my departure from Spain is I think you get born in a place and I think you belong to that place. For example, and I don't want to make it over dramatic, but if I was to live in Spain and make wine there and I die in a car accident there, they actually will ship my body back to South Africa. Reason being, I belong here. And I think you must make soil wine in the soil where you're ultimately going to get buried, because that's the only soil you ever belong to. So I took a very philosophical, very long, hard turn, and my departure from Spain was not easy. And there were very many factors involved there, but I do think you must make wine where you grew up as a kid, where you started reading fairy tales, where the tooth mouse fetched your tooth, where you for the first time got news that Santa Claus actually doesn't exist, all of that. In that environment, that's the environment where you must make wine, because that's, I think, where the whole phenomena of terroir will come into place. Otherwise, you will always be a visitor to the land. And, I'm right now making wine exactly where I need to make wine, where I want to make wine. And I'm just in a very happy place, and I'm in a very, very comfortable place with myself and with the wines. I'm very excited about the wines we're going to be bottling in the next number of years. There's amazing work in the cellar. I have retired actually from making wine. I'm only in the vineyards mostly now. A lot of people say the wine's made in the vineyards, but then they're in the cellar all the time. I retired 2 years from the full-time profession of winemaking. I've got a winemaker here, Paul Jordan. He's very capable. He's been here for 8 years. He's earned that position. And it's enabled me to go much deeper into this viticultural thing. And I'm only now discovering what's in our vineyards. So I can't be thinking about other vineyards in the world when I haven't even figured out the basics of what's going on here. So,
That's a brilliant, prolific,
right
and existential answer.
Huh?
That's a brilliant, philosophical and existential answer. It was well done. Awesome. Well, do you have any parting words for everyone out there in quarantine?
No, I just, obviously we live in very uncertain times. And I think people must stay positive. Don't get panicky. We live in Africa, so we're a little bit more bulletproof here, merely by the ambient we live in daily. We don't panic that easily. A panicky cat always jumps on hot plates, so don't get going there. Stay calm. Drink good wine. Yes, I also want to thank all the people. I want to thank you for this evening, for being able to talk on your network.
No, thank you for joining us.
I'm not a very super technological guy. I mean, this COVID-19 thing has pushed me into technological corners that I've never been before.
Your passion goes through.
But thank you very much, and I want to thank every single person that's out there that's buying our wine, and I want to honor that transaction by giving them, all of the effort is definitely going into our wines, and we've got an incredible team of people here, and bottoms up, and keep your wines in a cool, nice place.
Fantastic. Eben, Sadie, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a fantastic conversation. Always love talking to you. You're so passionate about your soil, your grapes. Fantastic winemaker. So thank you so much. Until then, join in next Wednesday, 1 p.m. same time. I'll be joining another winemaker from Washington State. So until then, stay safe, drink well, and be kind to others. Cheers.
Thank you very much.